Hey everyone, welcome to this weekly briefing. Today is going to be a special day. We have a special guest, Alec McNayr. He's joining us today. He's going to tell us the story of his company being acquired, what it's really like. I'm going to ask him some detailed questions too. So you might want to take out a notepad. We're going to talk about some words like EBITDA and what have you. But as always, I'm joined by Matt Taylor, who's also going to throw his hat in the ring a little bit. Was acquired also. And so you two are going to be our players today. Maybe I can just be the quiz guy, the question answer guy. But Alex, let's start with you. I want to really just give people a brief history of McBeard, how it got started, and just let's just say like the size of the company. Give us a flavor of who you guys were, what you did, and how you got there for the first minute or so, and then we can kind of get into the details of this conversation.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. Really excited to talk about this. I'm talking about it a lot these days. So I had a background doing web development and online strategy and market research, and on top of that, screenwriting and pursuing entertainment business for most of my 20s. And then by the time I hit my 30s, I had started what began as a partnership with a guy named Alan McBeard, and we started working with a couple of different clients. Nokia was our first client ever, if you remember Nokia phones back when they were the biggest phone manufacturer in the world. And we started working with them just as the iPhone came out and started to eat their lunch, and so that was fun. But what started as a partnership turned into the beginnings of what would become one of the first ever social agencies that we called McBeard, Alec McNayr and Alan Beard. And it started with just the two of us, and then we had a couple of people to help. And then basically we grew from just the two of us to about 150 people over the course of 5 years. But the bulk of that growth really happened in like 3 years. So we doubled in size by employee base every year for 3 years in a row. And we started by working predominantly after we stopped working with Nokia, working because we were based in Los Angeles, working with entertainment companies. And so Disney and Sony Pictures and Warner Media and Netflix, those are all our big clients. And over the course of our main years of McBeard, our teams ran social media campaigns for about 600 movies and TV shows. And then over that time, we also started working with brands like Coca-Cola and Sprite and Mary Kay Cosmetics and AT&T and lots of brands like that. So we kind of did both those things, but always focused on social media. And then that company, McBeard, was acquired by a company called Fullscreen in 2015. And Fullscreen was then kind of bundled together with a couple of other digital media companies, and then fully sold to AT&T as it was acquiring Warner Media in 2018 and 19. So I stuck around for all of that and left Warner Media at the end of 2019 with hopes of taking 2020 off to have quiet time at home with no kids around, a lot of European travel. And that did not happen in 2020.
Not a lot of travel in 2020, my friend.
Not a lot of travel. We had to cancel a significant European trip in the summer, which is fine. But then since then, I've started two other companies, one with Alan, and he's kind of running off on his own again. And then I spun off a little brand consulting boutique called Spotlight and Company right now. And that's where I am spending most of my time with two other people that work for me.
So you started, what year did you start McBeard?
2009.
So in a 10-year span, you went from a company with two people to be part of AT&T. And how big was that department when you were in that in the 10 years?
Well, the funny thing is AT&T, once you add in all of Warner Media, was like 500,000 people in the totality of the company. So a massive company. And then the group that I was the EVP of marketing and communications over what was called Otter Media, which was a collection of a bunch of different companies. And that was probably maybe 5,000 people altogether.
5,000 people. So from 2 to 5,000 people in a 10-year stretch. Yeah.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
That's like attached to a rocket ship for a little while there.
I felt like it.
You didn't tell the Avatar story. I just wanted you to at least touch base on like, that is the gift.
Well, I have a lot of good
creative.
Right? So we worked with to start our first entertainment client was 20th Century Fox, and we got in through a referral, and then we did a movies social media campaign, and this is like 2010, before there was social media campaigns. It was like we literally like took it away from the college intern that was doing it, and they said, "Hey, these guys have a background in copywriting and marketing strategy, so do this movie campaign." And it was for a movie called Vampires Suck, which was a spoof movie on Twilight. And their goal for us was to have 100,000 Facebook fans, because they didn't even have like followers or anything like that way back in the day. There was no ads. And so there's a longer story here, which I can share another time. But essentially, we did really well. We got really scrappy, and we had 800,000 Facebook fans by the time the movie came out. So that was really successful. And so one movie begat another movie, begat two more movies, begat working with Sony Pictures and Lionsgate. And so by the time a year was done, we were working with a couple of different movie studios on multiple projects at a time, which is why we had to start hiring in more people. And one of those movies was we were given the keys to the Avatar Facebook page after it had already come out. This like 2011. In fact, our very first meeting at 20th Century Fox was the day after Avatar lost the Oscar for Best Picture, and so we're in there trying to be on our best behavior and be very impressive. And the meeting was being interrupted every 5 minutes. Was like, "Can you believe it? Like, come on!" It was the most negative energy in the building because they had lost the day before at the Oscars. But we were given the keys to the Facebook page for Avatar, which at the time had 25 million Facebook followers. And this was before the algorithm really filtered away. And so when you posted, it was instantly seen by tens of millions of people. And so we would make a post in a made up alien language, and then we would post that. And instantly, within like 60 seconds, they would have 1 million likes and like hundreds of thousands of comments. And so the pressure of hitting post in that experience was so aggravating. And so, and then our teams navigated that for years. So
the stress,
it was crazy.
I can't imagine
the stress,
pressing that button like on the hot seat and having it just go out.
Yeah. And then so many people like, "It's not how they say it on Pandora."
Yeah, it's insane. That's so insane.
Endless nerdery.
All right, so that's the background. If you guys kind of know like the rocket ship that Alec was on, but the interesting part of just signing up, and we should all just recognize that there's a certain time, a certain place that you can do that. And that right time, right place, right skill, right connection is some of what you were sitting on. And that you became very unique in a marketplace. You got in early, so you're an early adapter. And you didn't create a monopoly necessarily, but you definitely had the win on everybody else. You had more capability and a bigger roster than anyone else, so it was easier to come back to you.
Right.
You hit 150 person mark, and today's conversation, I kind of want to stick to this transition moment where there is a moment that you decided to sell. I think a lot of people know or expect their company to have some sort of an asset behind them. And people are curious of what does it take to exit? What might it be like to sell your business? And should they or shouldn't they? And I think you would agree, like me, like it's not for everybody. There's going to be wins in different categories for different reasons. And you guys obviously took the path of doing the exit. So not to skip ahead too far, but kind of just skip ahead to the moment of like, I'm going to guess the structure that you were under, it was a win, right? Like you're in a position where things were going well and you decided, or someone approached you to be acquired, opposed to some people feel like they're up against the wall and have to do it.
Yeah, I'd say there's a couple different stages even before we get to the acquisition conversation. We didn't start this company like strategically, like to be acquired. I feel like because entrepreneurism is so popular now, we've had like 15 years of Shark Tank or whatever. People have some people start things with the exit in mind, and we never did. We started with just two guys that were creative and liked working together, and we were just trying to fill our time and get paid decently enough to pay our bills. And so I would say that one of the great things is that we actually were not building this thing to be acquired. We were just kind of like trying to be honorable with all the opportunities we had. And then we had more opportunities we could handle. We just kept growing. We knew that once we started hiring people, there would be this tension between having a pretty sizable payroll, even if you think about just being the two of us as freelancers, then going to a place where we even had 15 people. That was more growth than we ever thought we'd ever do, much less before we got to multiples of that. And so we always kind of face this real tough reality that I think most agencies find themselves in, which is, hey, I got this big amount of overhead, people, and if you have an office and all those things, and depending on how you're billing clients, you have this like monthly tension of like, hey, we got a lot of money going out the door. Do we have enough people, like enough revenue paying for that money? And so we were lucky enough that we grew so quickly that we never had to really worry about like letting people go. We never had to do layoffs or anything like that because we were doubling year over year for like 3 years in a row. We had the opposite problem, was we were hiring people too quickly, and we had the stress that people were on and feeling under about too much work on their plate. And we had enough money to take care of that with some money solving strategies. But we had a couple of years where we had, a lot of people who were really stressed out and didn't know how to handle the growth. And so we had the opposite problem, and it was a problem.
Yeah, sure.
We never,
but...
yeah, it's a good problem to have.
And before we jumped in now, like we were talking a bit about like the shape of companies that people want to buy. And I think like, you're talking like definitely like that first shape of having 10 to 15 employees is definitely something that a lot of people on this call can empathize with. But then you're suddenly 150. What are those two shapes like? And what's the difficulty of selling them?
Well, I'll give a general answer, and then maybe we can get to that a little bit later, because I have a couple thoughts on that, because I heard a guy talk on that recently. I would say, obviously, complexity and lack. When you get past 15 people, you get past the place where one person can influence all the work of everybody in the company, and so you have to manage by systems or by lieutenants. And so what we did was we navigated pretty poorly, I would say. I mean, we were nice and everyone liked us, and that was fine. But like, we had all the problems that we experienced stemmed from growing from 15 to 40 to 80, when we really didn't have great systems that were repeatable. But we tended to have really trustworthy and action-oriented lieutenants that we then trained and learned up, and then people followed them. And so instead of having a team of 150, we really had like eight teams of 20. And
so you did the who not how solution. You had the certain people assigned to it, and everyone had their own pocket, opposed to systematically doing it regardless of the individual. Yeah. So still in a very entrepreneurial stage. That's an entrepreneurial kind of problem, opposed to a small business or medium-sized business. Yeah, way of doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of those 8 teams was essentially, tasked with standardizing as much as they could the needs of all the others. And so, that's how we kind of treat it as like a spoken wheel type of situation. But I think to answer your question, Matt, acquirers either want to acquire a raw asset that they can form in their own image, and that's a smaller company or a small company that is doing really well that they can shape, or they want to acquire a machine that all they have to do is pour more resources on that machine, and it makes better results. I think that's the general take, and we can talk more about what that means in reality.
Yeah, that's a very good metaphor. And my other question that I was thinking about is, did you? I guess there's certainly like you have this dream when it happens, like you tell all your friends, oh my God, I'm getting acquired. And they go, oh my God, you're going to be so rich. You can buy one sports car, another sports car, and just crash them into each other over and over again. But when you think about what happened a year or two later, do you think that the company that bought you had a plan? And was the plan that they told you the same plan that happened? Because like there's this bundling that went on in that story you just told at the beginning. Is that the bigger plan? Or did you unpack a plan later on?
Well, let me answer that with 2 stories. Number one, we didn't really have any intention, and we never sought out being acquired. In 2014, a year before we were eventually acquired, the agency, so we were working with AT&T, and the agency that was representing AT&T was one of the big conglomerates. And they, the people we were working with over there, reached out to us to talk to us and really court us to be acquired. And we were probably 60, 75 people at that time. We were still growing very quickly. And so they, had some meetings with us, and they took a look at our books a little bit, and they flew us to CES to take a meeting with their president. And so it was nice. It was nice to be looked at. But it was our very first time even entertaining the idea of being acquired. And they ultimately made a lowball offer to us, what we felt was a lowball offer versus our growth. And so it was very easy to say no to. The other reason we said no to it, and this answers your question a little bit, is that because they were a giant agency conglomerate, we would have literally been agency number 601 in their group of 600 agencies. And nothing makes the girl not feel special at the dance than being number 601. And so we knew we didn't want to go join a situation like that. And so that was more than the money, the deciding factor. We didn't want to go where we were just like one more agency doing the same playbook. We would get lost in the mix and be a very small fish in a big pond. And we thought, there's got to be companies that would be delighted to acquire us and have our expertise, but that don't do our thing, making us a strategic hire. Hey, we're going to be strategically added on to what they were doing versus being a financial hire, where those agencies, yes, maybe, that giant agency that would have acquired us, they weren't acquiring us for our book of business. They work with all the big companies, and they didn't need our handful of companies. They already work with them. What they would have done is added our expertise to add on social media billings onto their existing things, being a bolt-on, maybe a 3% uptick on their billings. But all that doesn't feel very interesting to someone who cares about creative and the team and all of that, and also very easy to be discarded. And so not every agency goes like that gets acquired by the big roll-ups, but my experience in talking to other people is that is pretty common. Is if you get bought for your book of business, it's like make your numbers or you're done. And we wanted something that felt a little more strategic.
Isn't it interesting how as you approach this tipping point of being acquired or looking to be acquired, how important other factors are in making that decision that you can never anticipate until you get there. Sometimes it comes down to, and I think maybe the creative business owner might be making the wrong decision in this thing, but sometimes it's like, you're going to change the name of my business? The answer is no. And I have to walk them through something like, hey, there's other plans here. There's other opportunities, and who you're going to be, and your career evolution of who you're going to be inside of a larger agency. Don't worry about the company name change. But sometimes you can have a hang up on I'll say the small things. It's not a totally small thing, but it feels very small in some situations. Yeah. But then also introduction to something like, wait a second, what are you going to do with my business? What am I going to be on the other side? And Matt, you had that situation where you were acquired by a consultancy, and you kind of became that bolt-on, element to their marketplace to be looped in and be sold and added onto. And it's a very different play out than being a strategic partner and a strategic growth partner in some of these acquisitions. I don't think most people are aware that those are different opportunities that you have to come across.
Yeah, no, trying to figure out why, because there's often a reason you're told, and then you find out there's this deeper reason. I mean, either way, it's going to be a challenge. And I was watching a lot of Chef's Table at the time, and there's this Brazilian chef who had this great quote where he said, change isn't change unless it's uncomfortable. And my wife turned to me at the time and said, well, what you're about to do is really uncomfortable, so I guess it's change. And I think, that it isn't going to be this smooth slide, but you want to know why it's happening.
Yeah. So Alec, it sounds like your situation worked well. Like you had some discernment. Were you working with somebody? Was there an advisor that was on your side and helping you process, understand it? Oh, you guys were guessing.
My advisor was my partner, Alan McBeard, who we both were going through it. And I think in retrospect, if I had something to wish on myself from 10 years ago, it would be, hey, you need someone to talk to, just to bounce ideas off of, to have not just the nuts and bolts business acumen happening here, but just what do you want out of life? Some version of coaching. I'm hesitant to say coaching because it's such a buzzword these days, but some version of that.
Just say consulting, because then it sounds better for my position.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Great consultant.
But someone who's just A great consultant. So I'll say, so we said no to that opportunity. And then we said, hey, what are a couple of companies that we think are interesting doing work in the media, entertainment, advertising space that might be interested for us to be acquired by? And we made a list of 5 companies and we put it in a drawer and we never did anything with it. And then within a year, within 12 months, one of those companies came calling. At the very end of 2014, we had a lawyer reach out to us saying, hey, I'm representing a client and they're thinking about acquiring a social agency and you're on their list. Would you like to talk to them? And so that company ended up being Fullscreen, which was, again, one of the very early multi-channel networks on YouTube, helping creators get more AdSense revenue for their videos, then providing services for them increasingly over time. And as Fullscreen started providing and navigating brand deals for influencers on YouTube, they said, hey, we should acquire an agency to have more agency services as we work with brands. And so that's why we get acquired. That was the thesis upon which we were acquired. Hey, these guys know how to do social media marketing and advertising services. It would be great to have them in our mix. And that's why we were ultimately acquired. Now to come back and answer your question, Matt, we had drinks at around the 1-year anniversary after being acquired with the head of sales of Fullscreen. And we're all a couple drinks in. And so we asked, he said, hey, can I tell you guys the truth? And we're like, please tell us the truth. He's like, I love you guys. You guys are great. I love all your people. You're so nice. You're such a joy to have in our crew. I don't regret having you guys in the company at all. I really wasn't asked if we should acquire you or not. And had they asked me, I would have said no.
Wow.
And the reason he gave was, to me, one of the many reasons why there was so much tension between Fullscreen and McBeard over the years. It wasn't because people were mean or didn't like each other or at odds. It was because Fullscreen sold CPM packages. They sold essentially advertising or media, and they sold to people who buy media. And they buy for a variety of factors, but based on an effective CPM. And we sold services. We never used the phrase CPM. And so these things didn't go together in the sales process of putting these things together. They can, but because of all the factors of what happens when you acquire a company and an earnout and all that stuff, we were incentivized to go and pursue our thing to no end and not integrate with Fullscreen. And they were incentivized by all of their leadership and incentive packages for executives to go their thing and not go back on it. And so it took us 4 years of banging our head against the wall saying, why don't these things go together? When really it's what I call sales strategy incongruence. We were selling 2 separate different things to 2 separate buyers. And though we were friendly and ultimately did get folded together, it never really quite worked. And that was, to me, the source of all the tension.
I've had similar situations where I was brought into exactly that. A company was acquired by a larger company and they couldn't figure out why the pieces weren't going together. They had asked me to come in and basically be a translator between the two. And it took a while to kind of wrap my head around what the real problem was. And the reality was we were looking for different clients, where a lot of production companies and studios, what you think your client is or who your client actually is to cash flow your business are these end users, the advertising agencies or brands that you're going with, however. But these larger conglomerates, these ones that are acquiring you, their clients are other investors and Wall Street and so on. They're performing to a totally different metrics for different reasons. And you're supposed to just fold in and start keeping those numbers up or have certain sales goals. And you're a creative agency or a creative brand and you want to do something. So once we kind of figure out those pieces, then it was much easier to understand who to hire, what our growth need was, how to make certain decisions. But there is a like mismatch right there initially. And you have to ask the bigger question, what's my real job? What are we looking for? What's the win? But you participated. I'm gonna turn this over to the group a little bit here because I'm gonna do a little bit of Q&A too. And we usually stop at half hour till, but I've recently learned that we are rolling easily to 40, 45 minutes nowadays in these conversations because they kind of just pick up at the 30-minute mark. But so maybe I kick off this with just my own question in that at the time of the acquisition, there were, maybe I'll just go back and forth with a couple of quick questions just to set the stage, but you had 150 people in your company. Your profit margins were, what were your profit margins about?
Like 25, 30%.
Wow. So 30%.
25, 30%.
Okay. So the acquisition team that came in, they either gave you a multiplier of revenue or a multiplier of EBITDA or a modified profit. So yours was probably on EBITDA at 30%, right?
It was really because we weren't being, again, we were a strategic buy, and we were being bought to add a service to what they're doing. And the thing I mentioned in passing was that as Fullscreen was acquiring us, it itself was being acquired by a private equity firm called the Chernin Group, who already had a deal with AT&T. And so this thing was mapped out to be acquired over that time. And so we knew that going in, which was one of the reasons why we were kind of, okay, well, we're playing with the big boys here, and this is kind of interesting. We don't know where it'll go, but it seems like it's going to be positive. And so part of our value of being acquired wasn't just for the service. It just wasn't for the profitability. It was for the storytelling. So Fullscreen becomes more attractive to be acquired by AT&T if it has all these things and this. So anyway, it's storytelling.
So the private equity group was financing the acquisition of through Fullscreen of you, but they gave you a multiplier, which people might not know is that when you sell your business based on the revenue you have or certain growth, you can have a one-time multiplier, like whatever your total revenue is, that's what you're going to be bought out as. Or 3 times profit might be equal to the same as that. So your multiplier was probably 8% or 7 or 8 times your EBITDA, which is a profit.
Yeah, it was in that range. Yeah, it was. I forget the exact number, but it was like 6-7 times trailing 12 months annual profit, right?
Yeah.
And the reason I remember that is because the way it was outlined to me, because we eventually did hire a lawyer that helped us navigate that process and do all the contract work when we actually got into a real conversation about it. But the way he laid it out, he's like, hey, listen, they're acquiring you for 6 to 7x your annual profits, because based on how you're growing, they're making a bet on you that over the course of 4 years, that will pay off. Just based on finances.
Yes.
So 6-7 years versus 4 years. So they're hoping you'll grow by such a high amount that your profits will grow, and then that window will be shortened. Because otherwise, if you just stay the same profit every year, well, then it would take 6 or 7 years to pay off that acquisition of your
so
company.
In their case, they're looking at a 25% return on investment, because you're taking that growth over a 4-year period, divide 100% by 4, you get 25%. So they're looking for at the 5th year to be making profit, and clearly they're going for maybe a 7-year plan with you. So there's another term that people might not be familiar with, which is earnout. You already said one thing, which is look back, by the way. So you did a 12-month look back. Some people have to do 24, 36-month look back. So you can be looking back the last 3 years and doing average of revenue of the last 3 years. And that would be what your multiplier is based off of, if you're doing revenue or profit. You did a 12-month, which might be good or bad for you. I don't know how your previous 3 years looked, but you probably had some good gain in the last 12 months. And then you had a earnout period, which means
we had to show them 3 years, but they only considered the price to be a 12-month look back.
They're smart negotiating their behalf, probably. But then there's an earnout period, meaning you don't get your full payout until you finish a certain amount of time. So your earnout period was 2 years or 3 years? How long was your earnout?
So I'll actually say there are, for me and most people I've talked to, because I've talked to about 15 founders that have gone through this similar situation over the last couple of months, there seems to be 4 levers on a purchase. You tell me if this is your experience as well, Tim. Number 1 is just cash up front. Hey, you do the deal, you get the cash. Now, a small amount of that is held back based on, hey, is there anything that is wonky in the numbers or whatever? So essentially, they agree a certain amount of cash right there when you sign. And you get 90% of that right then, and then 10% of that a year from then. Fine. The second one is an earnout, which is basically saying, hey, there are targets and goals your company needs to hit for you to get extra money. And there's different levels based on what you can do there. And we had 2 years worth of earnout goals. And reminder for me to say later, don't make earnout goals that are in conflict with each other, because you can't always grow in revenue and grow in profit and grow in retaining. And we committed to all 3 of those, thinking we'll hit all of them, right? So you can't do all those things. And so that was a little bit of I wish I would have done that differently. It worked out fine. But and then the third thing, so I did so cash up front, earnout, stock vesting stock in the acquiring company. And so I got full screen stock that took 4 years to vest, and that's fine. And then the fifth thing was stock options for the team, for the team members. And we had a certain amount of stock options that were made available for our team members.
So we call that a package.
Levers that
like, the full package is, hey, what you got up front in cash, what you're going to get in further in the back end. Clearly, just to explain to people, clearly the reason doing that is they want to retain you. They want you to stick around. And they want your team to stick around, because that's what they're buying, is the ability to keep this machine going. And if they have quick turnover, so they're going to, as part of that package, they're going to give you money for your team. There's possibly some bonuses. There's possibly earn out for some key team members and so on. What everyone needs to know is that there's no guarantees necessarily on the other side. There's no long-term contract. So you might be thinking you have a 2 or 3 year earn out, and that acquiring company can actually cut you off at 1 year. So that's why the cash up front element is one that's in the bank, and you're not gambling, but you're going to have to really earn out that side. And I want to say both you and Matt, you guys went beyond the earn out period. I mean, that you earn that out, plus most likely gain something of a position or other financial gains because it was going so well, because they would have cut you off at 1 year if it was not going so well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got a question here from Terry Lee, which says, how did you go about determining the valuation of your companies? Did the acquiring company do their own evaluation, or was it through a bipartisan entity? Thanks, Terry.
Matt, you want to do yours?
Yeah.
You.
Go for it, Matt.
So I'll just say, sorry. Yeah. We did not go through a bipartisan entity. I know a lot of people who do that, who have a company come and do their, not 403. They make the official document about the market valuation of the company. We didn't do that. The acquiring company did it, and then we talked, because we were not seeking to be acquired. We weren't really pitting other people against it to do a bidding war. We liked the fit of what was happening there. We liked the people, and so we just wanted to have an earnest conversation about what they were willing to acquire us for and what we were willing to part with control over. And so we kind of just took what they did as a first step and then negotiated from there.
And some people might not know this. Oh, go ahead, Matt. Go ahead. Chime in.
I mean, certainly, they made me an initial offer, and I said no to it, and then they came back with another one. I mean, they were an accountancy firm, so I thought, well, they're going to be pretty good at doing numbers. And then as it rolled out, I really then saw that they had a very clear idea of like, this is what a company of 10 people worth, and this is what a company of 20 people's worth. And they had these very clear shapes in their mind about what it was, regardless of what sort of company it was.
Yeah, a lot of people might not know this, but the operating agreement of your current corporation might control some of this as well. There are certain buyout agreements that are put into operating agreements. And if you don't have one, you should definitely talk to your lawyer and start talking about that. There's opportunities for one person to control that buyout, or not everyone has to be on the same page. So that's one thing that can kill a lot of deals, is if everyone has equal voting rights on everything and there's no other terms for a buyout, you can, that conflict between the 2 or 3 of you can actually kill a deal. Where inside of operating agreement, there might be an opportunity to say, well, listen, if you don't want to do it, the operating agreement allows us to take the cash given to me in this deal, and I'll give it to you, and then I'll take the other side of the earn out, or I'll take the other side of the back end gain. So I did a survey recently in community to talk about operating agreements, and that's one of the reasons why is like there's a lot of control and need to put control in operating agreements, because these are unforeseen situations, and you don't want to, if you're ready to exit and your partners are not ready to, you need to be able to have some understanding of how that work goes together, and not have just all your assets crumble without any control over it. So both your cases, you guys were, I think almost, to answer Terry's question a little bit too, almost everybody, once they get the initial offer, has some sort of negotiating power. The hidden thing of negotiating that people don't often talk about is what your salary is going to be after acquisition. There's a lot of opportunity to lock in a salary, actually put a contract to that salary. So you're guaranteed something in addition to the cash up front and the acquisition money. And that salary doesn't only have to be back-end bonuses. Some of us, that's what we're looking for, is security, and that salary can be more important to you. So there are values for each of you going through this acquisition, and that's what you're looking for when the timing and purpose of the acquisition has many pieces to it.
Alec, I've got a question.
I was going to add to that one thing real quick related to that about your role. The thing that was that we actually did negotiate a fair amount was the term of non-compete and non-solicit tied to the acquisition. And so in California, where we are, a non-compete is not enforceable by normal employment law, but it is if it's tied to the acquisition of your company. And so that was a pretty serious consideration, so that once they acquired our company, there was a set number of years where I could not do advertising work in the world, no, in the contiguous United States for a set number of years post-acquisition. So another reason to kind of negotiate various parts of that deal.
Hey, Mark, why don't you just unmute and you can ask us that question? You don't have to read it out to. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even know. I thought you just said no talking. These guys are talking.
No, go for it. Yeah.
I think you just answered the question, Alec. I always wondered if there was any stipulation in the acquisition contract that didn't allow you to start like a McBeard 2.0 or So yeah.
Yeah, essentially it was 3 years. 3 years, a 3-year window for that.
Yeah, and that's part of the package. That's why they're giving you the cash and whatever. They can actually buy. That's how they get around the California laws, is they can lock you in and saying, well, that's what the money is for. I can put you in place.
Brian asked a question, which is about, I guess we've also talked about this, Alec, the people. So did you have to tie key players to the acquisition in addition to yourselves?
We did not have to. We asked if they wanted to put people under contract, and they didn't feel the need to. We were really lucky that we had an immense amount of loyalty among our people, and I'm super proud of the fact that held even after we got acquired. We really didn't have anyone that left very quickly after we got acquired. We had people that just didn't like the full screen vibe after a while, and you're like, that's not really for me, and that's okay. But yeah, we didn't have to lock down anybody, and they didn't really want to do that. They had very few employment contracts for anyone in the company. But it was kind of their way, so they didn't want to do that. The other crazy thing, I mean, the joke I always made. Yeah. I was going to say, the joke I always made was that we had no offices. So from 2010 to 15, we had no office ever. We were work from home before it was state mandated, and cool. And they didn't meet any of our team until a month after we had been acquired. And so our whole team rolled into their offices, like 150 deep. And they said, oh, good, you're actually a real company, because they essentially acquired 150 MacBook Pros, and the relationships and working knowledge of all of our people. And so it was really important for them to stay, which is one of the reasons they wanted to lock down Alan and I, because we were the leaders of the company, and they knew if we stayed, a lot of people would stay too.
And did you say that your team got some sort of stock options as well? They were able to buy their own stock options as well?
Yeah, they gave us a bank of stock options, and we made those available to people based on their hierarchy and tenure.
Brian, answers my question too. There are situations, especially if you're developing technology, where like a CTO or development team is what they're actually doing, called acqui-hire. You're actually acquiring a certain team of people and their capabilities, so you do have to lock them in. But they're also incentivized. So part of the package they might give you, and some of that cash up front is required for you to incentivize that team. And in some cases, that incentivization might have to come out of your pocket. So if they give you $2 million, but it's going to cost you $2.2 million to keep your team, that's reduced from what your pay is going to be. So that's some of what is out there and negotiable. But that's, those are tech driven or video game driven kind of companies around that would do that more than not. And I've been in other places where the sales team has to, like 60% of the sales team has to stay intact in order for the acquisition to take place. So that there's often like a uptick in commission structure in order to get people up on the other side of there. They're really, in that case, trying to keep the client base around. Alec, in your case, you're saying maybe they cared about your actual client roster but sometimes that client roster can be very important in the like publication space or application space, or even the gaming space. There can be a lot of needs to keep those bigger brands around.
Oh, they cared a lot. We were the social AOR for Sprite at the time. And on the day we were going to announce it to our whole team, we had gathered everyone, again, all work from home people, into one meeting venue. And we we're going to announce it that morning. And then the people who were requiring us said, hey, we want you to promise for in a variety of ways that you're going to keep Sprite as a client. And we're like, no, we're not doing that deal. And so, and we went back and forth, had multiple calls behind the scenes with them that day, and finally like said no enough times where they said, okay, fine, you don't have to do it, we'll sign. And then we marched at like 4 p.m. after like holding all day to tell our team to say, all right, now it's signed official, here's what's happening. So they cared a lot about it, but we just said no.
And what was it like the day that you told everyone? Because I remember the day I had to tell my companies, like, I've made this decision, and now I'm hoping you're all going to be cool with this decision I've made. I felt like I was writing an Obama speech that day where I was sort of promising people this unknown future. But what was it like for you when you're telling everyone what was the future?
My memory of it was that it was actually quite positive because it felt like a validation of the thing we were doing. And that it was an opportunity to grow into a bigger world and bigger opportunities. And for us, we cared about not just the opportunities for ourselves and for the kind of work we wanted to do, Alan and myself, but we wanted a place that was going to be big enough and steady enough that we could weather the storms, because we knew if we lost any significant client and didn't replace that revenue, you'd have to let people go. And so there was a fair amount of business buffer in the acquisition that allowed us to, weather the hardships of running your own thing. So that was very positive, and we didn't lean on that too hard. But I think people knew that like this is going bigger and bigger, and we have big clients. And what happened? People hear about layoffs and stuff, and so that was positive. But like I said, the day was largely positive because they didn't really know what to expect. I would say on average, we had a pretty junior team by age and experience. I'd say a lot of people that worked for us, it was their first or second job out of college. And because of the nature of our work being social media, it tended to be a young person's game in 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14. And I'd say that's a lot of agencies don't necessarily have that same issue. And so we had a lot of people that are just like, oh, this is cool. All right, fine. Like they didn't know any different. And so it was largely positive that way. Mark, you could tell me if I'm totally wrong.
I was going to say, should we ask Mark?
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, actually, McBeard was the first agency I'd worked as creative in a number of other small business and larger places. And navigating the agency life was really easy with McBeard to begin with. And once the acquisition, like I remember a lot of whispers like, oh crap, like what does this mean? Like, we're joining like a big company. Like it felt like we were part of this like real like tight-knit group, and everyone kind of loved each other. It was very family oriented. And then all of a sudden we were kind of just thrown into like this deep, Olympic sized pool where there was just, and like Alec had mentioned earlier, like not knowing anyone from Fullscreen was like very intimidating, because it was like, okay, like here we are, this ragtag, bunch of creatives, like, all over the Southern California. And then you have these like hip LA based, like talent acquisition, like type people or whatever. And that's, it was very intimidating.
Yeah, we're running out of time, but there is probably another conversation here talking about the crash side of this thing, because sure, you have to stick with it or not, but your team doesn't have to. And sometimes, if not every time after acquisition, you create two competitors in the marketplace because key people realize there's no gain for me here. I can leave and go take one of these clients or a couple of these clients and start my own agency. So that happens as part of it.
Yep.
And then Mark's situation is exactly some of the situations I've been part of too. Post-acquisition, trying to keep the team together, fitting into new operations and new structures that are there. And, just the likelihood of connecting everybody, 150 people with however many thousands of people you're going into, those are just hard times for people. And I think we have these dreams and ideas that everyone's going to be happy. But reality is some people want to be part of a small agency. It's just what their calling is and purpose is. And some people, it's just life. They're not leaving for the good or the bad situation. it was time for them to move on, or time for their family to move, or time to do something different. So there's just, you know, no matter what the year was going to be, it was going to be difficult. But when you infuse some of it together, it does kind of create a crash for some people, and you have to make a new business, a new company out of it.
At Deloitte, there was they said, actually, I had people say to me, well, we're expecting there's going to be an 18% attrition rate. And so they were just looking at me, and when they say, is anyone left? I'm like, yeah, this person left, this person left. Like, oh, that's good. You're still good. And they were just sort of marking it against whether more than 18% people had left each year. And you could then see how they would factor how many people would stay over 4 years or 5 years.
So I'm going to officially wrap this up, and then we can kind of keep on going after the fact. But I just want to say thank you, Alec, for being part of this conversation and kind of opening up our eyes and being honest and truthful. I know you're kind of on a journey right now to give people this insight. I think it's part of what you want to do as your calling, and give more people permission to be honest about this situation. Know that they could face it if they want to, and educate themselves on that behalf. So this next, you know, journey you have in life is opening the door to this. I appreciate you sharing that with us right now.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for having me.
Alec is part of Community, by the way. This conversation can keep on going in Community. Throw some questions out there right there in the discussion forum, and I know Alec will kind of contribute there. We'll take this video and post it there so you can keep on tagging. But I'll just, you know, give our team at least the thumbs up that, you know, this part of the conversation is over. And I'm with you. I have like 15 more minutes before I have to hit the stop button on this, or 10 more minutes before I hit the stop button on this conversation. So happy to just, you know, talk about, you know, maybe more of what it's like on the other side. If anyone's curious, I don't know if anyone wants to be vulnerable and throw something out there that they're where they are and considering this with their own company. But as you know, we're all kind of open book. And between Matt, Alec, and I personally have gone through 5 of these acquisitions myself, being that I was part of a team that was being acquired and shuffled. One of them being my very first employment ever, which was RGA Los Angeles. RGA got acquired into Footcomb Building, and the entire team disappeared except for a handful of us who luckily had just done the title sequence for 7. It wasn't yet released in the theaters, and so the 5 of us remaining became imaginary forces just by infusion of luck as well. But that and Trailer Park and a couple of other entities, you kind of walk through this thin line, and that transition time is an interesting transition time. So be happy to talk about some of that as well. Alec, let's throw something out there of just like, you know, what was one of the things you hoped for that didn't happen? So maybe like, what's a regret through this thing that you could give somebody a lesson on?
One of the biggest regrets I feel like I have, it had more to do with myself than the acquisition. You know that saying about the lottery, like when people like win the lottery, it doesn't change who they are, it just amplifies who they are. And so if you're like, you know, it just amplifies what's happening with you internally. That's happened with me already. And what I'm actually only grappling with in the last year or so is the reality is pre-acquisition, I kind of out of a little bit of fear and a little bit of safety, really relegated myself to the operational side of the business instead of keeping very hands-on in the creative side of the business. Now, part of that, some fear, my own fear of rejection, some of that stuff was happening inside of me. And part of it, just the nature of a big company. Hey, you can't have one person directing the creative for 100 people. It just doesn't work logistically. But if I was being honest with myself at the time, and I was not, I was kind of painting myself into the back office where I was taking care of a lot of the people that were taking care of teams and taking care of the functional HR stuff, and getting acquired only poured cement on that situation. So I found myself after the earnout and after all that time, kind of in this no man's land of like, I don't really like the work I'm doing, but I kind of have to keep doing it to keep up appearances. I'm kind of unhappy. I'm kind of aimless. I have nothing but time. I could pursue lots of different things, but I feel like I have to be a good boy and honor the commitment that I made to this company who has hired me to do this thing and given me money to do this. And so how could I complain or want to do something that actually pleases myself? And so I had all these internal things going on, and it kind of made me really unhappy for a long time, but I had no one to really say I'm kind of unhappy, because I can't fathom the internal monologue of someone who hears your company was acquired, you have a good job, you have money, you have a good family at home, and you're unhappy. Like, cry me a river, my man. And so that was the internal narrative in me that really went unchecked for a number of years, and then the pandemic and all that stuff. And so I'm actually unpacking all that now. So my biggest regret is not just grappling with that, honestly, with myself and with people who know and love me. And that led to kind of a decade of lost wandering. And so that's my big, you say I'm going through stuff. That's what I'm going through.
That's what that's a perfect thing to share, because it's almost the reason why I want to have this conversation right now in community. So let people know, like, it's okay. We have to be able to relate to the idea of, like, the acquisition, although beneficial, is not the win-win-win. And on the other side, you're going to go through something, and you're going to need some people to say, and we're going to have to learn to be compassionate, because it's hard to say, like, woe is you, Alec, you got acquired, blah, blah, blah. That's what we're thinking in our mind. Like, no, it's real. It's your somewhat stuck, and there is a earnout here, and you're a real human that has a different desire for your career and for your life. And this one business move shouldn't define all of it. And so there is more of, like, there are people out there. I want people to meet you and know that you're out there to say, this is the person that will relate to you. This is the person that went through that transition the same way.
Yep. Yeah. Because it wasn't just about the acquisition. It was about what I've recently just started calling private pains in the midst of outrageous success. Like, how do you navigate those things? That's what I was going through.
Hey, Jason,
that can just be growth and success.
Jason, jump in here. Tell me what that experience was like. Jason's saying that he was actually part of an acquisition that didn't last. The last one I was part of, it seemed to be that way too. Most of the team did not last past a year. Jason, are you there?
Hello.
Hey.
Yeah, I'm here. Why is my video not working? Why am I in driving mode? That's really annoying, because it shouldn't be. You probably can't see me, but I assume you can hear me.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, great. So, yeah, I mean, I was 2001. I was one of my very first jobs working in video games. The video game industry can be ruthless with this kind of stuff. People come in and buy studios and suddenly the thing's gone. And EA probably is still doing this type of thing, but they were definitely known for it. And so Digital Illusions had some of their own IP stuff. They were doing their own things on the side, but then they started working on a lot of Battlefield kind of expansion pack stuff, for EA. And EA came in and bought them, and then within 6 months to a year, there was layoffs, and then maybe 1 or 2 years maximum, maybe the entire studio was shut down. It was really sad to see. It went from, like, this really great company to work for, to suddenly being like, yep, EA's gobbled you up, and now you're nothing, and kaboom. Like, so, yeah.
It can go very fast, can it? And in some people's cases, they kind of banked on this thing of, like, hey, if I make it past a year, I'll get certain shares or whatever. And then at 11 months and 3 weeks, the layoffs happen, and that promise doesn't happen. And there's a lot of broken hearts and broken thoughts. There are a few people that do make it past that point, but it's a little ruthless on the other side. It can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just a low level, junior background designer, so, obviously I had no part in any of it, but just to see it all go down really quickly, it was just like, this is crazy. Like, and emotionally attached, like, still to this day, I'm kind of like, that kind of sucks. It's like, went from this company kind of doing their own thing to, okay, well, kind of being a vendor, if you will, for EA. Like, okay, bums and seats, you guys need a bunch of assets made for these Battlefield expansion games. Let's go. So, and I totally understand why Digital Illusions would do that, but then, on the other end of it, okay, you don't even have any of your own thing anymore, like, that company at one point, and sorry, I'm ranting now, but this company at one point, and this is kind of, a lot of people, this is so old now, but they had a coder there who basically, like, some of the very first normal mapping done on a video game, on the Shrek game that we worked on for the Xbox, and Xbox apparently came to them after and were like, how did you just do that? Like, it was that kind of, it was an amazing place to work. And anyway.
Yeah, just disappears.
Really, really sad.
I think there is like a little, I'll say some of the takeaway there could be too that the entrepreneur who sold, it can be very thankless.
Yes.
And that's where, Alec and Matt, you guys probably can be in that situation too, where the employees are being hurt and they look at you as winning and them as losing, and they don't have a lot of understanding of what it's like to be that entrepreneur that says, like, you don't get it. I might have had to do this, or I didn't have there were other reasons that we had to go through this process than just, I'm making a bunch of money and you're not. But it can create some animosity between you and people that you've loved for many years. And then there's like a little bit of a split up there, isn't there?
Yeah, that was certainly in my head the whole time. I mean, I felt like that was something that was certainly a worry of mine, and certainly led to me doing something that I thought was generally positive, was doing my absolute best to protect my team from all the shenanigans that happened, above them in the organization. And I did deal with 4 years of shenanigans to ensure that our team had relative autonomy to kind of do their best work. And so, that's part of the game. That's, to quote you from before, and to quote Don Draper, that's what the money's for.
That's what the money's for. Hey, I need to wrap this up because our small group's going to start in about 1 minute, and this is the Zoom account that I start the small group. But let me encourage you who are listening right now. There's a podcast that we released last week. It was with Joanne Chan, and Joanne's company, Turner Duckworth, was acquired by Publicis, and she was she was not one of the owners at the time, but she is the remaining member and took over a CEO role. And to listen to her process and what it was like acquisition, it's basically a part two of a two-part. I think she was episode 100 for us, and now almost episode 200 for us. But another perspective of what it's like to be part of that other side of that team and grow beyond that. I want to encourage everyone this way too, is like this. I know this moment isn't right for everybody, or these aren't and how everyone's going to exit in these extreme situations. But I like the idea that it's setting up an expectation for you that this thing you're doing right now isn't everything. There's the business, and then there's your career, and then there's your life, and you have to keep all of that in balance. So while you're doing your business right now, and if it's going well, that's great. But don't be surprised someday where like there's going to be a turning point, or there's going to be opportunity. There's going to be something. I don't want you to be caught by surprise and not know how it works. I want you to understand and prepare. If it's the right time for you in the right moment, let's be proactive and do it. So that to be said, Alec, thank you again for sharing. Matt, thanks for sharing your story. Mark, Jason, others, Brian, thank you guys for all contributing to this conversation. There's a lot of great stuff happening in our industry right now. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, but there's a shift that's taking place. And if we open up our mind to these opportunities, we're going to see new things. So I appreciate you guys sharing and allowing that to take place.
Thank you, Alec. That was awesome.
Yeah, if you're not part of the community, please feel free to join us, RevThink.com/community. You can keep this conversation going. Feel free to start a post, ask a question. Alex is part of that. We can do that. Matt's part of that conversation. Do it. And until next week, we'll see you again next week. We'll think of another great topic and have everyone pitch in. But appreciate you being here, and we'll see you guys soon. Thanks, guys.
Love it. Thanks, y'all.
Okay, bye.